Oh, well, hello, everybody. It's Colin Ellis here, and welcome to another Culture and Coffee podcast for Monday, the 23rd of May, 2022. Almost halfway through the year already. Where is the year going? Where's the year going? It's a nice, soft, gentle entrance into today's episode. I feel like that's what it requires. It's a pretty chill weekend. Hope you're good, wherever you are in the world. Hope you're excited about the week ahead of work. I must admit, I was never one of those kind of dread Monday kind of people. I think because I always found some way to enjoy my work, unless Everton got beat. Um, in which case I just didn't want it, particularly when I used to live in Liverpool. Like I never wanted to see Liverpool fans. So quick sports reference here. There's two teams in Liverpool. There's the team that I support, and then there's the good team. It pains me to say that. My team obviously have got history and heritage and class, and the other team don't. But that's another story. Oh yeah, and I just want to say a huge thank you. Like way more people than I thought actually emailed me or messaged me and said how chuffed they were that my team didn't get relegated. So Everton didn't get relegated last week. We managed to survive the dreaded relegation. We haven't been relegated for a long, long time. Yeah, so like for some teams, the season is about winning things. For Everton, it's about not losing our status in the top division, which is like a really rubbish version of winning. But I have to say, and I got up super early to watch the game, as I have been this last month. It's just been crazy. I've been getting up at like, I don't know, 4 a.m. and 3 a.m. to watch the games live, as you do when you're in it. Because this is my hobby. Like some hobbies that people have are really relaxing. I know some of you listen to this podcast now and have some really like super, oh, I love to grab a book and read in the sun. Actually, I like that too. I haven't done much of it recently. Oh, I love to knit. I love to crochet. Whatever it is, like that's always, these hobbies are super relaxed. Yeah, not me. Not relax. My hobby is just for the last, I don't know, I want to say 8 weeks. It's been the most stressful thing, and then you get some really unhelpful tips when you've got a really stressful hobby. People are like, well, why don't you just stop watching it? You're like, yeah, because that's how this works. Is I can just switch it off and go, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. People always say, what do you miss most about England? It's a family. Yeah, it's like, nope. I miss going to the football. Anyway, I'm not going to talk anymore about sport, but thank you to everybody who wrote me. Yes, I was delighted. And yes, one person asked, did I cry? I did. I shed a little tear. What else is a 52-year-old fella supposed to do when he's sat on his own celebrating at, I don't know, 5 a.m. in the morning? Of course I did. Today's coffee. Moving on very quickly. So this week's coffee is from El Salvador. It's called I think it's called a Milaydi, Milaydi, and so I immediately want to pronounce it Milaydi. Like I'm some kind of figure from a Charlotte Bronte book or a Jane Austen book. Milady, yes, Milady. Actually, Milady, that sounds like, what was that dude's name in Thunderbirds? Parker. That's the best theme music ever, actually. Thunderbird. Like if you have never heard the theme music from Thunderbirds, like the second this podcast ends, and not before, by the way, just go and get on YouTube and put theme music from Thunderbirds. Best theme music ever. Like I can like best ever. So yes, this week's coffee is a Milaydi from El Salvador, roasted by Ona Coffee in Canberra. I was in Canberra last week to run a culture workshop. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. It's a great little bag. It's got what I love is when you buy the coffee is when they have all of the details on the bag, and you would think that every a bag of coffee you buy does, but it doesn't. Sometimes I have to go fishing, and then sometimes I have to go searching on the website for the details of the coffee, but not for this one. So it's got it all on. I just thought I'd pick out one. Oh, so three things you might not know about El Salvador just before I get stuck into the coffee. Right. So one, it's known as the land of volcanoes because there are so many of them, and obviously that's why coffee is such a big thing because it grows at altitude, right? So the second thing is it's the fourth largest coffee producer in the world, El Salvador. So it's a tiny little Central American country, but because of the altitude, because of the soil, right? It's got like I don't know, it's like 100 volcanoes or something in El Salvador. And the third thing, which you may or may not know, it's got great surfing. Now, if surfing's your thing, get on to El Salvador. Today's Culture and Coffee podcast has been brought to you by the El Salvador Tourist Board. Do they still have tourist boards? It was the thing when I was growing up in England, tourist board. Like, and they used all of the Jedi mind tricks to make you visit like just the worst, most crumbling seaside resorts in England. Come to Southport. It was good 50 years ago. So three things. There you go. Land of volcanoes, fourth largest coffee producer in the world, and it's got great surf. If that's your. Someone said to me, I was in America a few weeks back, and someone said, "It's like, oh, you live in Australia, yeah?" It's like, "Oh, I've heard the surf is great." I was like, "Yeah, I've heard that too." He's like, "Oh, do you not surf?" I was like, "Funnily enough, growing up in Liverpool, surfing really wasn't the thing that we did." Like when someone said, "Oh, do you ski or snowboard?" I'm like, yeah, I've watched both of them on the TV. Anyway, back to what I was talking about. Oh yeah, the coffee, the information. You can tell I've had a sip of my coffee, can't you? I've just so much energy, it's ridiculous. The coffee bag. So one of the things that I picked out is the varietal, right? So variety, same word, I guess. Listen, the varietal, when you see the word varietal, it's just like a fancy woke way of saying type, right? That's your translation for the day. If you see varietal, just means type. Just like there are different types of apples, like Golden Delicious and Royal Gala and Granny Smith, the worst apple, Granny Smith. Don't even get me started. Like, I can get passionate about some things. So, Golden Delicious is just water. Yeah, but it's sweet and it's delicious. A Granny Smith. It's like, when you take a bite into a Granny Smith, your face just contorts immediately. Anyway, like, it's all right. It's all right in apple pies. Maybe I should start an apple and culture podcast. So, a varietal is just a variety, right? And so the varietal of this particular coffee bean is Pacamara, and there is a great website because I was like, oh, Pacamara, what's that? And so there's a great website. It's varieties.worldcoffeeresearch.org, varieties.worldcoffeeresearch.org, and it breaks down every single variety of coffee. So I just went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much information. So it produces very large beans, the Pacamara. I didn't know that. It's exceptional potential quality at high altitude, but it's susceptible to coffee leaf rust, which is a disease that only coffee plants have. So yeah, there you go. Its origins were in 1976. But there's loads of information. I could read all of this, but it's boring. No, it's not boring. It's just long. And it's an Arabica bean. And I thought, like, I'm giving you all the coffee information here today. The Arabica beans, right? So I'm not sure if you know this, but there are two types of beans, right? You've got Arabica and you've got Robusta. Like, Arabica is easily the most prevalent bean. Most of the coffee that you drink is Arabica. It originates from Ethiopia. It's like 60-70%, I think, of the world's coffee production is Arabica. And the name was thought to originate when coffee traveled from Ethiopia to Arabia, which is about the 7th century. So Arabica is coffee that comes from the beans of the coffee Arabica plant, which originates in Ethiopia. Best coffee, Ethiopia. Anyway, enough on the coffee. Enough. That's Everton coffee and a bit of apples covered in the first 9 minutes. Let's talk about what you're actually listening to, which is 3 Signs of a Toxic Culture. Let me just have a drink of this coffee, actually. Yes. Wow. That's really nice. That's really nice. So it says on the bag here, what does it say here? It says it has notes of white grape, white nectarine, caramelized peach, and florals. I mean, there's a hell of a lot going on there, to be honest. Let me see what I'm getting. it's got a real sugary sweetness taste. I don't have sugar in my coffee, but it tastes really sweet. So I get the caramelized peach. I totally get the rest of it. Yeah, nice. 3 signs of a toxic culture. Have you ever worked in a toxic? Put hands up if you've worked in a toxic culture. Yeah, me too. Not great, is it? It's not great. You know when you're working in a toxic culture. You just know. There's a feeling that comes with a toxic culture, and it's not a great feeling. Like, you question yourself, you question your decision making. On your growth mindset days, you believe that you can make a real difference to the culture, and you should. I mean, when you're in that situation, that's the way to approach it. And yet, often, it's very hard to influence it, particularly if it's driven from the top. Now, for those of you who've read the books and read the blogs and listened to me on here before, you know that I say that culture is everybody's responsibility. It's everybody's job to contribute to culture. Of course it is. Where you see things that aren't right, it's everybody's job to do something about it. I've been doing I'm doing a culture workshop every week at the minute. And I'm getting people to talk about all of the great stuff that they do, all the great stuff that they saw during COVID, and also to talk about the opportunities they have for improvement. And almost every team has seen an element of toxicity during the last 2-3 years. There's a report not long ago, and I must dig it out actually and read it properly, about the fact that, kind of empathy is on the wane, which is really worrying. But that's definitely what we saw in the pandemic. We saw lots of compassion, empathy at the start, and it's kind of been on the wane since then. And for me, that's the first sign of a toxic culture, is that there's just no empathy between staff members. Nobody wants to build any relationships. No time and effort is put into it. It's not given any kind of priority. And that's why I would say that every organization that I work with, I don't think any of them have a toxic culture coming into the actual workshop, because they're actually making the time. And often, working with the team next week, it's 150 people they're taking off site for 2 days. Now, toxic culture would say, "Oh, we haven't got time. It's not important right now." And actually, there were 2 clients not so long ago who made culture their third priority, and so we ended our conversation at that point. But both different clients. One of them had an appalling engagement score as well, but they just didn't want to give it any priority. And I think, when there is that, I guess, apathy towards wanting to build relationships, wanting to give people a say, then what that does is it gives rise to the worst of us. And no one wants to be the worst employee. No one's, hanging out today. No one's getting up on a Monday and going, "Right, here we go. Today I'm going to be the worst of me. Here it comes, baby. Get ready. I'm rolling up." No one wants to do that. A toxic culture gives rise to that. And a bad attitude. Yeah, there's a few of those about. But more often than not, it's people feel that way because they feel that they have no choice. So in those kind of situations where you aren't able to build empathy, or when there are people telling you that, ordering you about, right? Or telling you what to do, you got to do this, you got to do that. And they're not interested in you. They're not interested in thinking about the way that you consume information. They communicate in their default preferences, all of those kinds of things. Then what happens is we bring the worst of us to work. We start gossiping, which is just an appalling thing you can do to another human. There's a lot of backbiting. There's a lot of blame. There's lots of suspicion. Trust has to be earned, not assumed. Like all of those things. So that's the first sign, when there's no desire to understand each other. Now, often, I don't want to be too hard on managers here, because sometimes managers, kind of do their best to generate empathy between people, but then employees just don't want to do it. They really don't. you kind of have people who dominate conversations, and you have people who just don't want to turn up to any kind of social thing. Or why should I turn up? I don't want to do this. It's not for me. And that's not what vibrant cultures do. Vibrant cultures, individuals step outside their comfort zone and do things that ordinarily they wouldn't do, but they recognize that it's good for the team. So that's the first thing. There's no empathy between staff members. The second thing is, and I've talked about this on a previous podcast, I think a couple of months ago. I talked about it might have been at the start of this year. I talked about kind of brilliant jerks. I know that feels like it was last year. Brilliant jerks. So the second sign of a toxic culture is brilliant jerks aren't dealt with. So those people who are technically good or technically okay, I would say, but emotionally appalling. Now you can see the first two things, the first two signs is really about emotional intelligence, right? The second thing about not dealing with brilliant jerks is that there's a real lack of discipline and courage often on the part of managers to deal with this stuff. And it's even worse when those brilliant jerks are leaders. Do you know what I mean? Like when there's like one rule for a leader and one rule for everybody else. When a leader chooses to display those, how can I put this, less than humanistic qualities, or else it's just a bit rubbish at their job. They haven't stayed relevant. I talked about that recently. They haven't taken the time to stay in touch. They don't know how to use technology. Like none of these things, you should know how to use the technology. You should be up with world events if you're a leader. You should have your finger on the pulse of the world almost. You should understand kind of what are those key topics in around the globe right now, because you have to have an opinion on, not that you have to share them with everybody, you at least have to have an opinion, but ultimately if you're not a good human being, then it's just going to generate the worst of people. It really is. So you can see, like, toxic cultures is low EQ. What toxic cultures do is they generate low emotional intelligence. And often we still care about the work. That's the thing with toxic cultures is we care about it. We just go about it in the wrong way. Shouting, screaming, bawling, lots of anger, lots of unachievable targets. But I just never cared for it. That's the understatement of this morning. Never cared for it when managers chose not to deal with brilliant jerks. And it's a choice, right? It's a choice not to deal with that stuff. Is when you've got people who are undermining the psychological safety of the team or of the workplace, then it's a manager's job to deal with that. They're not leaders, they're managers' job to get on that and deal with that. Talk to that individual about their performance, talk to them about their behavior, make sure that you're setting expectations really clearly, all of those things. But we all know when we've worked in kind of toxic cultures, and it's not many people, it's only like 2 or 3 people. If there's just 2 or 3 brilliant jerks whose behaviors and performance goes unchecked while the rest of us are doing our utmost to really smash it out of the park, then it just generates the worst in us. And then the last thing is when people actively get in the way of change. These people are, right, they're cynics, right? People who have given up but won't shut up. People who will do anything to tell you that, they'll find every way possible to tell you that they're right and you're wrong. They're great at telling you what's not possible. They'll come up with a list of things that either aren't possible or reasons why we can't do something. Can't do this now, can't do that now. And when people continually do that, they drain you. They utterly drain you. And consequently, you become physically and emotionally tired, and all of a sudden you're the worst version of yourself. And before you know it, as soon as 15% of the workforce kind of are either disengaged or behaving in a way that, is not the best of them, then it just infects everybody else. But I want you to remember that the flip side is also true. You know me, I love to end the podcast with a positive. It only needs 15% of people to change the culture. So if you're working in an environment where there's toxicity, you have to be the lone nut. You have to be the person. You have to be the catalyst for change. Now, you're not going to walk around the office going, all in for change in culture. We used to do that on the playgrounds back in the day. It's literally the only thing I can remember from school. Apart from stabbing Joanne Howard in the cheek because I had a pencil in my mouth. That was 10 at the time. There's those two things. Sorry, Joanne, if you're listening. So it's not about that, but it's about finding those people that believe the same things you do, embracing them as equals, and then together working against the toxicity. It's a question I get all of the time. I work in a toxic culture. What can I do? Well, what you can do is wake up every morning with the right attitude, kind of growth mindset. But I'm an optimistic realist. It's very difficult to do that when the conditions are pretty bad. So what you need to do is find people who are like you. You need to set up some kind of informal chats where you don't become the people that you're trying to change. You talk about the good that you can do to help others see what's possible. Now, ultimately, if people are behaving in a way that threatens you or the safety of the team, then there are things that need to be reported. Not that I'm actively encouraging you to... Actually, no, I am actively encouraging. If those things are true, if you feel like you're being harassed or bullied, you need to report it immediately, right? And there's a certain amount of courage and vulnerability that comes with that. I totally, I appreciate that. I've done it myself. I did it myself once. But it's something that you need to do such that other people don't feel, similarly to you. But I think if you can find some people who are like you, you won't, like I said, you only need 15% of the team to start to think differently and to constantly talk about possibility, be a realistic optimist, talk about what's possible, and then talk about the steps that you need to take to get there. It's very easy for me to say on podcasts and in blogs, be the best version of yourself. The reality is there are so many factors that get in the way of you being the best version of yourself, from idiots on the road, from people coughing on the tram, from just some of those micro interactions that you get on a day-to-day basis, right? I saw someone shouting at someone the other day because they jumped the coffee queue. Yeah, fair play. At least they had a go, right? There are so many things that get in the way of that, and just be a realistic optimist. Recognize that things are going to get in the way from time to time. Recognize that at some stage in your career, you're going to experience a toxic culture. Just don't become part of the problem. Become part of the solution. Find 15% of the people who are like you and be a collective force for good. All right. That's your Culture and Coffee podcast for today. For those of you who listened, I hope you enjoyed the Culture Makers podcast. So as I mentioned, these podcasts are going... It's going to be fortnightly for the next couple of months while we do the Culture Makers podcast. So if you haven't already subscribed to that, just search for Culture Makers podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And you could get a different perspective from somebody else who knows lots more about culture within their context. Anyway, have a great day wherever you are and look forward to speaking soon. Ta-ra for now.